This guy, a hardworking fish farmer, goes on a business trip and vanishes into thin air, leaving behind a confused wife, a stack of bills, and a mystery so tangled it makes a soap opera look straightforward. This isn't fiction, folks. This is the story of Craig Williamson, a man who disappeared in 1993, only to reappear years later with a tale that raised more eyebrows than answers. Craig and his wife, Christine, ran a tilapia farm in Wisconsin, which was their passion and their livelihood. If tilapia doesn't scream glamorous, don't worry, neither did their financial situation. The farm was struggling, and the couple was desperate to turn things around. So, when Craig headed to Colorado Springs for a business trip, Christine thought he'd return with some new connections or maybe a few fish tanks. Instead, Craig's trip would kick off a saga involving lost memory, a dive bar in Florida, and an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. The whole thing began on August 30th, 1993. Craig called Christine from his motel, sounding upbeat and making plans for the next morning. Nothing unusual, right? But when Christine called him the next day, there was no answer. The motel clerk checked Craig's room, only to find it completely untouched. Craig had vanished like a magician with something to hide. Naturally, Christine panicked. When she reported him missing, the authorities gave her the classic wait 24 hours routine because apparently a grown man disappearing overnight isn't suspicious enough. Here's where it gets weird. Weeks later, Craig's wallet showed up in a market in El Paso, Texas. Not his phone, not his car keys, just his wallet. A short time later, authorities discovered that Craig's rental car had been driven across the Mexican border to Juarez. So, let's tally this up. A missing man, a wallet in Texas, and a car in Mexico. It was starting to sound less like a missing persons case and more like the setup to a true crime documentary. Christine, however, refused to believe her husband had walked out on her. She was convinced something terrible had happened, and honestly, who could blame her? Craig had always been a dependable guy. Well, until now. 2 years went by without a trace of Craig, and then, out of nowhere, Christine got a call that could have been ripped from a Lifetime movie. On the other end of the line was a man claiming to be Craig. "Hey, honey," he said, as if he'd just been out grabbing milk and eggs for 2 years. He told her he was living in Key West, Florida, working as a diver. Oh, and by the way, he'd lost his memory after being mugged and wandering the desert for weeks. That's right, his explanation involved desert amnesia, a story so wild you'd almost want to believe it. Christine, still in love and desperate for closure, flew to Florida to reunite with Craig. And sure enough, there he was, alive, sunburned, and surprisingly well-adjusted for someone who'd supposedly spent 2 years not knowing who he was. Craig explained that after being mugged in Colorado, he'd been left disoriented and confused. He wandered aimlessly until he wound up in Key West, where he started fresh. His memory was hazy, but he was piecing things together. The kicker? Craig claimed he'd realized who he was after seeing his face on a rerun of Unsolved Mysteries. Let that sink in. Craig found himself on TV. But not everyone bought Craig's story. Investigators began to poke holes in his tale, questioning how he'd managed to survive and thrive without ID, money, or any apparent connections. Key West locals described Craig as a competent diver and employee, which seemed odd for someone supposedly suffering from head trauma and memory loss. And then there was the elephant in the room, Craig's debts. His farm had been sinking under financial pressure when he disappeared, leading skeptics to wonder if his amnesia was just a convenient escape plan. Craig doubled down on his innocence, insisting he had no motive to abandon his life. He described his disappearance as a freak accident, a perfect storm of bad luck and worse timing. Christine, standing by her husband, chose to believe him. The couple even gave interviews about their reunion, painting it as a miraculous twist of fate. But the internet, and armchair detectives everywhere, remained divided. Here's the thing about Craig's story. It raises more questions than it answers. How did his wallet end up in Texas? Why was his rental car abandoned in Mexico? And how did he manage to build a new life in Key West without leaving a single breadcrumb for 2 whole years? Theories abound. Some think Craig orchestrated his disappearance to dodge creditors, while others believe his memory loss was real but exaggerated. Either way, Craig Williamson became a walking enigma, a man whose vanishing act captivated and confounded everyone who heard it. In the end, Craig's story isn't just about a missing person. It's about the mysteries of identity, the fragility of memory, and the lengths people will go to reinvent themselves. Whether he was a victim of circumstance or a master escape artist, one thing's for sure. Craig Williamson didn't just disappear. He left behind a puzzle that still doesn't have all the pieces. Thanks for watching, and if you're as fascinated by tales like these as we are, make sure to stick around for more.